Okay, it's a kind of iffy morning, but I'm glad everyone is here. We're going to get started a little early because I think there are going to be a lot of questions, so I want to give plenty of time for both explication and questions for the meeting today. It's a topic that has spread across the nation as the Common Core has spread across the nation and now has come to our town. And there are a lot of issues that we want to deal with here too and hear about what it's going to be and what it's going to mean to our community, our teachers, our students, and the system as a whole. So before we begin, however, I think we'll first have our tidbits and then introduce ourselves, okay? We always begin with our tidbits from Jeff Megan, who gives us a little insight into our local community.
I'm very excited today. I have two addendum to my 2 past months. I'm so excited I found another historical cemetery. Thank you for that applause. What line? It's wrapped around by the F.E. Bellows School, and it's right off of North Barry Avenue. If you go in that little, that wasn't part of, listen, it's hard enough to find these things. It's got about 30 residents, and it's right near the new playground that they built for the school. The other addendum is, I went through the parks of Mamaroneck Village last month, and I spoke about Gillies Park. And Gillies Park, does anybody remember where it is? Yes. Okay, where is it?
Orienta and
Old Post Road. There's a triangular piece of land in a very nice little park called Gillies. And somebody said, who the hell is Gillies? I remembered a woman named Anita Gillies. She was a local activist, but she was married to a character. And the character was named Ed Dooley. I don't know if anybody remembers who the hell Ed Dooley was. Ed Dooley was first known as an All-American quarterback for Dartmouth in 1927, but then he became mayor of the village of the village of Mamaroneck in 1950. And in 1956, he became a 3-term congressman from our area. That's some note. He lost the next term in a primary to Ogden Brownie Reed. That you all will know. He had a bit of money to put into the campaign. Even then he had money, yeah. And then I lost power. There?
No, they asked us to turn the volume down.
Oh, okay.
You're fine.
I'm fine anyhow. So then Ed Dooley was appointed by Nelson Rockefeller to be the athletic commissioner of the state of New York. And athletic at that time meant wrestling and boxing. And he was of note because he was the one that suspended the license of Cassius Clay because he refused to be drafted. Wow. Ooh. So on to, quickly, Village of Larchmont Parks. I'm doing this in 3 sections. And number 1 is Damati Park. Does anybody know where Damati Park is? That's correct. And it was named for a police officer who was killed while on duty. Number 2 is Plaza Park. Anybody know where Plaza Park is? It's steps from Damati Park. It's that little park on that side of Palmer Avenue next to the house and before the brokerage firm there. Addison Park. Anybody know where Addison Park is? No, it's not on Addison Street, actually. It's on Chatsworth Avenue. Thank you very much. It's at the end of, no, this is next to the CVS parking lot where the supermarket used to be. Okay? Constitution Park. Anybody know where Constitution Park is? Next to the firehouse where there's a gazebo. Number 5, Kane Park. Anybody know where Kane Park is? Bob.
Down near Kane Avenue.
Oh, thank you, Bob. That's the same thing with Addison. That's on the Post Road, and it runs between Beach Avenue and Kane Avenue, and in the past decade, it's really smartened up, and there's a gazebo there. Pine Brook Park. Now, everybody knows where this is. This is really, to know it, it's opposite Jack's, right? If you get your car fixed, it's opposite Jack's. And that's a great little children's park. Lorenzen Park, which this is where all the Little League plays and so on, and they have that beautiful Little League field there, and it keeps getting chewed up by that nursery, you know, they keep taking land. That's Vanderburg Park. It's really Turtle Park, okay? Number 9 is Willow Park. Now, this is an official website, and they've misnamed Willow Park. It is actually Woodbine Park. It's not at the end of Woodbine Avenue. It's at the end of Willow and Oak, but it's Woodbine Park because it's on the Woodbine subdivision map that covers from Beach Avenue over to New Rochelle. And then, like Mamaroneck, which has the preserve, which is not a public park. I'm sorry. One more park is Flint Park. Obviously, one of the jewels of Larchmont. Thomas J.S. Flint, which leads me into the last park, which is not a public park, and that's Manor Park. And it's not paid for by the Village of Larchmont or the town of Mamaroneck. It is paid by the Larchmont Manor Society. And in 2003, they raised over $1 million private funds to redo the seawalls and so on. It is absolutely wonderful park run by the citizens of Map 610, which only goes over to Beach Avenue. So theoretically, if you're on Map 610, you have a perfect right to join the beach there. If you're not, you don't have a perfect right, but they never fill it up, so they go to the rest of the Larchmont Manor and then to the unincorporated section, and maybe they allow a few Village of Mamaroneck people in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now want to introduce ourselves. Is this at all coming in? I can't tell.
know.
Anyway, we all want to introduce ourselves, not only so the speakers know who's present, but we each other know who's sharing this morning with us. I'm Elaine Chapnick, president of the local summit. I think you should just shout it out. Stand up, identify what organization you're with, or what organization you participate in, or where you reside in the tri-municipal area. Shirley?
Shirley Hilton, Mamaroneck Village. August Schultz, Home on the Sound Women's Club, OSVP, who stands for the Drive Seniors doing volunteer work.
Fran Snedeker, and you will notice that I'm wearing red today. And that's because today's finally the day when women are catching up and they're no longer in the red. It's National Equal Pay Day. The day in 2014, the women's salaries finally catch up to men's earnings from 2013. 15 months of work for 1 year's pay for women. Thank you. More than 1 million households in New York, and more than 63% of working mothers in New York are the primary breadwinners.
Can you just make your announcement? I'm sorry, we can't take it.
So what I'm asking you to do is to contact George Oliver, he's not here yet, but after you get home, call him at his district office to let him know that you are depending on him for to do all he can in leadership skills to make sure that the Women's Equality Act gets passed in the New York Senate this year.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
I'm Janet O'Connell on Summit Board and at Home on the Sound. I want to remind everybody our gala is on May 1st. Last year we honored our very good Mary Lee Marriage, and this year our honoree is Ellie Fredston. So I hope you'll join us on May 1st.
Good morning, I'm Malcolm Stroman, I'm the president of the Larchmont Mamaroneck Hunger Task Force.
I'm Harold Woodson, I'm with the Summit and Human Rights Committee, and there was some news last night at the Board of Education A number of individuals here sent letters to the board in regard to the position of Keith Geiser, a counselor to at-risk students. And this position has been retained for a year. And the summer program has been renewed by a gift from an unnamed person of $200,000. Mary Lee and Mayor, and so they may have other comments.
Janet, let's keep our comments very brief, please. Just announce who you are. And where you're from. We're never going to get to the program. Go ahead.
I'll be very quick. Janet Buckbinder for the Summit and Radar. Another drug take-back day. I'll pass these around. Please hang them in your workplace or your favorite spot around town.
Okay.
So we can get it out to everybody.
Come on, just name your name.
Mr. Allen, Pastor Mamaroneck United Methodist Church.
Great. We know
Mr. Tidbit, Jeff Megan, LMC-TV, and Summit Board, and they got no agenda.
Nina Cuddy, I like these tidbits.
Bob Hayden, Summit Board, at home in the Sound. John Bradley, the same.
Nancy Pearson, Mamaroneck School Board.
Jane Elkinini, Town of Mamaroneck Councilwoman.
Peter Wise, Sherwood Drive, Washington.
Great.
Ruth Wise, retired teacher, citizen.
John Gitlitz, I'm not sure who I am, but I'm on the Summit Board.
Ernie Odier, Deputy Supervisor, Town of Mamaroneck.
Elizabeth Stanger, Summit Board, and Larchmont Mamaroneck Human Rights Committee.
Thank you, Mamaroneck.
Mike Rosenbaum, resident.
Audrey Clarkin, retired Scarsdale.
Louder.
Please.
Rachel Goldman, parent, resident.
Jim Needham, Board of Ed.
Linda Kalos, Town of Mamaroneck.
Doreen Pichelle, Summit and Don Bosco workers.
Mary D. Berry, the most important, I thank the school board members that are here for the merit and the special people who helped do what they did to bring about the good things at the school board meeting. Please sign up and pay.
Thank you, Fred.
Janet DeMacy, Summit Board, continuing education, take classes.
Carolyn Pomerantz, LMC-TV Board, Summit Board, League of Women Voters, County, and local boards.
Judy Gartman, resident, private practice, reading specialist, educator.
Kate Moody, lifelong educator, Columbia University.
Amy Levere, Larchmont.
Let's see, Summit Board, and now Larchmont Mamaroneck Continuing Ed Board.
Sabrina Fiddleman, Summit Board, LMC-TV, and Larchmont Mamaroneck.
And now I'm going to turn the program over.
Wait,
Oh, I'm sorry, we forgot the side. Sorry, Irish.
Armin McAllister at Home on the Sound, Westchester Children's Museum, and especially today, I want to announce that the Larchmont Mamaroneck STEM Alliance is having a STEM-tastic Saturday on May the 3rd. Please come, 1 to 5, lots of fun.
At Bahamas.
At Bahamas.
At Hama.
Right. Okay. Jane?
Hi, Natalie
sorry.
Moran, resident at Central School Parent.
Oh, I didn't see you, Natalie. Go ahead.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Now, I'm going to turn the program over to Sabrina.
I'm going to embarrass you just a little. Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for coming. I want to introduce our panel this morning. Their topic is the Common Core Standards, a primer, as Elaine has already told you, and they are Annie Ward and Colleen Melnyk. Annie Ward has been the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction in the Mamaroneck School District since 2004. Before coming to Mamaroneck, Annie was a local superintendent. Stop me if I'm wrong, by the way. I want to be right, at least. A local superintendent in the New York City Department of Education. Before that, she was supervisor of curriculum instruction for the Ridgewood, New Jersey public schools. She has an undergraduate degree from Princeton University and a master's in teaching and curriculum from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. In our district, Annie's extensive work has shaped the teaching and learning that occurs in every classroom in our district. She's been instrumental in developing a consistent district-wide curriculum, K-12. She has worked to substantially increase the volume of reading that students are doing at the secondary level by heavily promoting independent reading alongside the Common Core, the core standards. She's created a gold standard professional development model that stresses collaboration, includes instructional coaching positions, and provides pathways for teacher leadership. You'll hear how that has really impacted our district and helped it address the challenges resulting from the Common Core. Annie's part of a team that developed a teacher observation and evaluation model that's raising the bar and at the same time providing teachers with the feedback and support they need to grow. And she has launched alongside Superintendent Dr. Schaps the dual language program beginning this year with a cohort of kindergartners to grow to K-5. Colleen Melnyk has been a teacher in the Murray Avenue School since 2007. She and I barely missed each other. I felt like I was at Murray for 100 years as a parent and we missed each other, I'm sorry to say. She's currently a 5th grade teacher. She has an undergraduate degree from Fordham University and a Master's of Science in Teaching from Fordham's Graduate School of Education. She's certified as a reading instructor, and she's currently enrolled in Stony Brook University's Educational Leadership Program to become certified as a building administrator. Colleen began her career in New Rochelle School District at the Ward Elementary School, and in the course of her career, she has taught, it seems to me, nearly every elementary school grade, not quite every. In our district, she's distinguished herself both in and out of the classroom. She's a member of the Mamaroneck Literacy Design Team, which in conjunction with the district's literacy coach, designs reading and writing units of study for the elementary grades. She's also worked with the district's math coach to align math units of study to the Common Core standards. Colleen is also a member of the district's annual Professional Performance Review Committee. As such, she has worked with school administrators and colleagues to provide guidelines for the supervision and evaluation of all district teachers and other instructional personnel. So as you can see, they really know exactly what's going on in the district at every level, and we are going to ask them now to talk to us about the Common Core standards. Thanks so much.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Thanks so much for this wonderful invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm certainly going to talk about the Common Core state standards, and I will tell you what our charge was. I think I'm standing right in front of you, Colleen. Let me get over here. So our charge was, in sort of a short overview, to try to do the following. Talk about the Common Core, what they are, define learning standards, et cetera, but then talk about why New York State and other states across the nation have adopted them. But then to give, I guess, a bit of a slant or a perspective on what's our take on the standards. Are they age appropriate? How are they playing out here in Larchmont and Mamaroneck for our kids? More specifically, what's all the fuss about? And there certainly is a lot of fuss, and we'll fuss a bit and get you to fuss along with us. But we're here to say we think the district has responded appropriately. It's been a challenging time. It is a challenging time. But we remain, I think, very optimistic about the future of education. I don't think I could get up in the morning if I didn't. And I remain convinced that it's the most powerful occupation there is. We have the privilege of getting to spend our days in the company of children, a couple of whom I think are still here, unless they've run off to look at the cookies. And I guess that's really where I wanted to begin, because, as I said, we're certainly going to get into the Common Core. But the thing that I would say as a longtime educator is that when we talk about teaching, our tools change, our methods evolve, but our mission really remains the same. And our mission is to stimulate and educate and nurture the hearts and minds of kids. And that's as true today in Colleen's class at Murray, where I have the pleasure of being often, as it was when I started teaching in 1988. It was true then. It was true in the 1930s when my grandmother was a teacher in rural Michigan during the Great Depression. So I think that's what we wanted to open with, was teaching means being in the good company of kids and figuring out the best ways you know how to figure out where they are in their path as learners, what do they need, what materials do you have that you can bring in to stimulate and provoke their curiosity, their thinking, and ultimately their learning. I left the classroom, it's hard to believe, I was thinking about it this morning. The first standards had just come into New Jersey in 1996, the New Jersey Core Content Standards. Similar acronym to the Common Core, 2 C's, just, in a different order. I actually never taught in a classroom that had the internet. Never did. I was an English teacher, so, it's amazing for me. And yet, there I was working on that mission as best I could. Colleen's classroom has all kinds of...
I don't know how I teach without the internet.
Yeah.
And I did start teaching with chalk and a chalkboard.
Yeah.
But we've transformed.
Yeah. So, I guess that's maybe the first and the last thing that we want to leave you with is that teaching is teaching. You have to have that heart. I'm a middle school teacher, so I know we're a very peculiar breed. Those of us who love kids in those middle grades, and that's really what it's all about. So I think in large measure, our work as leaders, which Colleen certainly is. I'll say more about Colleen in a few minutes because she's just a wonderful, sane and wise educator to work with. But I think our mission is really to take in all that is out there, and we're certainly getting a lot of mandates directly from Albany, and that's what we're going to talk about. But at the same time, go out of our way to take in some divergent perspectives. I actually had lunch at that table, probably right where Janet is sitting, last spring with Dr. Shaps, our superintendent, and Yang Zhao, who is a very prominent Chinese American educational researcher who sort of rails against the standardization that's taking place in America at the very moment that China is, moving in the opposite direction. So we've gone out of our way in the district to bring in people who are going to challenge us, to hold true to these core values. And I think that's why we wanted to really start with that. So I hope that was okay. That's a little off topic, but I think it's very much at the heart of what we wanted to say. Okay, so a couple of things, and I think we'll try to. How long do we want to talk versus questions?
You can each have about 10 minutes.
Okay, so you watching me?
I am.
Okay. Yeah, poke me. Okay. So what are the Common Core state standards? I guess first we thought it would be useful to distinguish learning standards from curriculum. So you might say the standard would be, can all kids in a physical education class leap over a 4-foot pole, right? That's the outcome. That's the standard. The curriculum is the set of learning experiences mapped out over time that enable kids to do that. So you might have 10 different physical education teachers. They might have different methods, but all aiming at that same standard. Okay. So I mentioned that New York State, actually many of you probably in the room grew up in New York State and know that New York State has had in place standards and certainly learning outcomes in the form of Regents exams. Probably raise your hand if you took Regents exams yourself as a, yeah, okay. I grew up in Massachusetts, so that wasn't part of my background. But so that concept is really not new. I think what's happening recently is that this long tradition in the U.S. of local control over education is shifting. And it certainly has shifted dramatically in recent times with the Common Core. But I guess in thinking about this talk, Colleen and I were talking about, it was really with No Child Left Behind back in 2001 that I think that was the first major shift, where NCLB required all states in the country to adopt standards. New York State, already had them in place, but then also required the standardized testing in English language arts and math in grades 3 through 8. So here in New York State, we actually had already a standardized testing program in place that actually assessed kids in social studies, imagine that, and science alongside English language arts and math, but we did not test at every grade from 3 to 8. So that was the first major shift that happened. And so then just to bring you up to date, it was in 2009 that a couple of national groups, National Governors Association, Council of Chief School Officers, partnered with ACT, the College Board, and Achieve, these various organizations, to develop essentially a national set of learning standards known as the Common Core. And the goal there, just to give you a couple of other buzzwords, was really to promote college and career readiness. There was a sense out there, I guess backed by a number of studies, that large numbers of students, here in New York State, there was one study that's often cited, that large numbers of kids who achieved high school Regents diplomas went on to SUNY schools and required vast amounts of remediation. So in essence, the judgment was that our standards in New York State were not high enough, that when kids went off to college, they really could not function effectively and independently as self-directed learners. So that was essentially the impetus, and I would say, and part of the fuss, anyway, in our state, is that New York State was among the earliest adopters of the Common Core, and we'll talk about the standards themselves in a minute, but it's these next two pieces that I think really have caused the fuss statewide, but here in Mamaroneck. New York State was among the very first to align those 3 through 8 tests that we just talked about with the new standards. So it's one thing to introduce new curriculum or new goals and then give educators a period of time to imagine what curriculum could look like and to design that in a very teacher-centered way as we would here in Mamaroneck and roll that out. But it's another thing to virtually simultaneously adopt the standards and then say, oh, by the way, this spring, which really was last spring, 2013, students are going to face exams that now assess their mastery of those brand new standards. So that's piece number, that's the first, kicker in this. And then the final piece, which I think is really what has caused tremendous unproductive stress and anxiety here in New York, is at the very moment that they changed the testing, New York State also tied teacher evaluation for the very first time to students' performance on these brand new tests. So I think that metaphor of perfect storm is sort of overused, but if ever there was an apt use for it, it would be with this. Colleen is a great example, and she'll share her story in a minute, but Colleen is a 5th grade teacher at Murray. Last year received, there she is diligently teaching the new curriculum, preparing her kids, not just for the tests, for goodness sake, but teaching and learning for mastery of important concepts. Her kids go off and take these new tests, and then Colleen receives a growth score from New York State that reflects her own children's performance over time on these new tests. So, which now counts, that score counts in Colleen's professional evaluation. So you have a situation that's really engineered in a way to cause teachers to be overly concerned. This is my, you'll give your take in a minute, but to be overly concerned, to kind of put undue emphasis on the tests themselves, and the system really, in a way, rewards that. So that is, in a nutshell, my fuss or my beef. I'll just say quickly before turning it over to Colleen that the standards themselves, I actually think, are fine. I mean, there are some bones to pick. As an English teacher, for example, there's a minimal emphasis on poetry, and here we are. It's April, it's spring, it's Poetry Month. So, and I guess. With that said, the issue about aligning curriculum, because we'll tell you what our approach has been here in Mamaroneck, is always to ensure how do we get kids to jump over those bars, so to speak, that are assessed. But we know that the tests assess such a narrow slice of what we might consider to be important. So yeah, we'll teach kids how to jump over that bar, but more than that, we want them to use that leaping skill to do something meaningful, purposeful, joyful, play a game of basketball, for example. So that's sort of a metaphor that the standards are a target for sure, but they in no way define the scope of what we think is meaningful or important. And that's our challenge, is to figure out how to design curriculum that that addresses the standards but promotes these things that we consider to be so vital for lifelong learning. You know, we're talking a lot about zest. Just think about that, zest, right? How do you develop a curriculum that cultivates zest or curiosity? As an English teacher, I know I want kids to develop literary preferences. I want them to have favorite columnists. I want them to know what it feels like to look forward to a subscription, you know, coming in the mail or now online. So if all I'm doing is preparing them to answer multiple choice items on an exam, I'm never going to get at those very things that I consider to be most important. So that's been our challenge, is to design curriculum that's responsive but not overly channeled into those narrow outcomes. We made notes. There are 1,000 things I didn't say, but I'm going to turn it over to Colleen because I'm sure you'll have questions.
I'll be very brief, but I'd like to share that in our conversations over the last couple of years, we've also used the analogy of what is this looking like from 20,000 feet and what is it looking like on the ground, because we all felt that we were building the plane and flying it at the same time. And Annie just gave you that 20,000-foot view, and I have to say, from the ground level, what has been most curious and challenging about the whole process is that this is a district that had such strong curriculum, strong ELA curriculum that the literacy design team wrote, a very strong math program, and we took pride in the fact that we teachers in the classroom were really the decision makers in our classes. I, as a teacher in New York State, have always taught to standards. My colleagues have always had sets of standards to teach to. We felt that we had much more authority and leeway to ask those vital questions that teachers ask. What do we want students to know? And how are we going to get them there? How do we assess that they've reached those outcomes? And then what do we do next? And it feels that what has happened over the last 2 years has been so top-down, imposed structure on us in a way that we're really trying to figure out how to navigate all of this. One of the units that we developed as a literacy design team was an inquiry-based unit. We want kids to wonder and be curious about the world. And this year we're teaching curriculum that is very restrictive and very scripted in a way, and not leading us to that outcome that we hope children have of being curious about math and wanting to investigate concepts and wanting to joyfully write and read. And so it has been challenging from the ground level. It's been very frustrating from the ground level. We are working together to figure out how to retain some of that decision-making authority a little bit and make things more interesting and more joyful for the students again.
We talk about, you want to talk about the units of study?
Oh, sure. As a member of the literacy design team, we spent a very long time mapping out units of study of what we want kids on the elementary level to be able to do in reading and writing in kindergarten all the way through 5th grade. We vertically align them, so what a kindergartner is doing is not necessarily what a 1st grader is doing, but they're all achieving certain standards. One of the standards that we've always had, which is a Common Core anchor standard regarding reading, is that students can read text and really understand main idea and details and talk about a theme and talk about important information. What that looks like in a 2nd grade classroom is very different from what it looks like in a 5th grade classroom. With respect to writing, one of the first units of writing that all students do in the Mamaroneck schools is a narrative, a personal narrative. And again, a personal narrative written by a 1st grader is very different from a personal narrative written by a 4th grader. But we took great joy in writing those units and figuring that out ourselves as teachers and educators of literacy about what would be most appropriate for students to do at each of those grade levels. I think that with respect to the ELA, it has been a slightly easier shift into Common Core standards since the standards we've already written those units to were so high. Math has been a little more challenging. And the other thing that I think I would be remiss in not mentioning is that teaching has to be a reflective practice. We have to be able to say what worked in that lesson, what went well, who really understood it, and what am I going to do differently about it next time? And oh, by the way, wouldn't it be great if I could talk to my colleagues about this as well? But the standards that have been imposed on us now, the structure that has been imposed on us now, has left us very little to no time to reflect on how to reach these standards and how to talk to each other about what is going on in classrooms. We've always had pacing maps for math and ELA. The pacing maps that now have been imposed on us by Common Core are very stringent and very fast, and again, don't really allow for a lot of reflection. With respect to testing, the purpose of giving tests or assessment is for teachers to understand what did their students really know? Who doesn't really understand what they need to do? And how are we going to address that? One of the beefs that I have about the new Common Core testing, and I just spent last week administering the ELA to my 5th graders. English Language Arts. I'm sorry, I should have explained that acronym first, I apologize. Is that we open the cellophane on these test booklets about 10 minutes before we pass them out to the students. We don't really know what's on those tests. We administer them, we pack them up, and we give them back to our administrators, and we never see them again. There's no way to understand what they did well, what they did not do so well, and how to use that information to inform our instructional practices. And that has been very, very frustrating as an educator. And it has left us feeling, not as efficient as we used to feel. And I work with some wonderful teachers, master teachers in this district, who've taught for a very long time. And when they're saying things like, I don't really feel so good about the job that I'm doing this year, I think that's a big red flag. And that's why our central administration is really looking towards how do we take the opportunity now to get our own staff involved in those reflective conversations, talk about what has gone well this first year, what do we really need to work on, what are our most important needs, and how are we going to adjust them.
Thanks.
Before I get to questions, George Latimer, our state senator, has come down to be in this meeting for this particular purpose, to be engaged in this conversation, and I think he would like to say a few words from the state perspective.
Great, thank you. Hi, George.
When I saw this originally scheduled, normally in the springtime I can't make Larchmont Mamaroneck summits because of the Tuesday morning schedule, but I figured out how to report a little late today, so, because this is a very important topic. And I want to highlight a couple of things, and I guess I have to frame it as the politics of Common Core, because there are issues about what happens in the school now that this is going forward, but also in the ramp-up to it, there have been some rather unusual things. First of all, when we talk about Albany, we use that as a shorthand to lump together a host of different decision makers in state government. It would be like saying the town when we mean the town DPW, we may mean the school. People don't differentiate the village from the town, and they just say the town. So in this particular case, some of these decisions that they've alluded to are decisions that have been made by the State Education Department, which is an independent agency within the state government. It is not directly controlled by the governor. It is not directly controlled by the legislature. And much of the implementation of the Common Core program and the testing program has been done by the Board of Regents directing Commissioner John King. And there has been a great pushback from the legislature and some pushback from the governor on some elements of these things we've talked about. We didn't touch on the data collection and the data privacy element of this, which is the one area where we directly legislated in the recent budget that was adopted. And those of us found very intrusive and not necessarily essential to the teaching element of these higher standards, the kind of data collection, 400 points of data for every student, working with a particular singular contractor in Bloom and storing all this information in a cloud without a clear understanding of who's going to access the information, how is it going to be used to teach, if it's your kid in the system, what are we retaining? Is that a fourth grade action going to be known by somebody when they're applying to college, and so forth. So that particular piece of it appears, and I say appears because you never know up in Albany, appears to have been disconnected with our action in the state budget, which took In Bloom as a vendor out of the picture. And I believe I hope there's going to be a rediscussion of what data collection is going to be necessary. Me personally, I've argued whatever data collection goes on should stay at the district level. It should not go beyond the district level. If you have to do state reports, and that's why you want the information, then you can do the old-fashioned way and collect it from all the 800 school districts. And without extending my portion of the role, because it's really about their program, there is a conservative attack on Common Core, and there is a progressive attack on Common Core, and you ought to have it in your mind that there are different lines of argument. My argument on Common Core as a progressive is, again, not against the standards, nor against the desire to have some level of competence nationwide that's clearly understood by all students that achieve it. But certainly the privacy piece was objectionable to me, and the excessive testing piece, some of which was built in by No Child Left Behind, offends my sense of what I think proper public education is. Now, I'm not an educator. We'll let the educators alert to that. But if you are teaching toward a test, you will have to question whether it is valuable enough or not to take kids to botanical gardens. You will have to question whether it is valuable enough to have a simulation at the Westchester County Board of Legislators, or whether those types of topics are going to be tested on, and not only are the students but the teachers going to be graded on it. And I think you'll lose the quality of education that you have, not just in Mamaroneck, but in Rye-Neck and Harrison and Blindbrook and Rye and a host of other districts representing those suburban districts. The final comment I make before I sit down is this. The general observation that American education is failing is made on some aggregate assessment. I represent now in the state Senate 16 different districts. Last night, I had the opportunity when I came back to go to a Portchester event and then a Yonkers event. And earlier last week, I went to a Harrison PTA Council meeting. These districts are in completely different places with completely different problems. It does not surprise me if 40% of your students are from New York City and you made an aggregate assessment of New York State students that they're lacking. But I don't find that they're lacking in Bronxville or in Bedford or in Byram Hills or, for that matter, in Mamaroneck. So I think there's a faulty premise underneath this because, and this is just, empirical observation, students have been graduating from Mamaroneck High School and Rye-Neck and Harrison, going on to successful four-year careers in the main, going on to graduate and law school and business school programs in the main, and functioning very well in the society, coming out of the very same discipline that's happened prior to any of these things. So I think what we've had happen is an aggregate assessment of what's wrong with education, and then an across-the-board answer, which I will argue is a political answer, not based on an educational discipline, and that, when it is applied to districts that have already functioned well, winds up becoming both disruptive to the educational process and, to my school board friends in the room, a cost that you can't afford when you're being tax capped. So those are all subjective political comments that I thought I ought to make. I wouldn't expect administrators or teachers to make those comments.
Thank you, George. Thank you very much.
Okay. Do you want to respond and say something about that, or do you want to take questions?
No, just thank you, George. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Yeah. No, for your advocacy, for your leadership, and for those those examples that you gave were absolutely on point. We've been having a lot of conversations internally about field trips. That's a great example of something that we, as sort of the guardians of education, absolutely need to keep in place. I always think Debbie Meyer, whom many of us in the room have the privilege of knowing personally, once said something that has never left me. I write it in every notebook, professional notebook that I have, that our job as teachers is to help kids imagine lives doing interesting things. Isn't that awesome? Yeah. And when you keep that as your North Star, I have to say, it really shapes what you do on any given day. So we're in the throes of response. We can certainly talk about the math landscape that Colleen alluded to, because that's where we're seeing a lot of fuss exactly this year. But that's our big picture. And thank you very much, George, for your advocacy and for your leadership. Yeah.
I really do want to thank you for bringing up the data collection issue. I think this is a very important issue. Education is not the only industry right now facing decisions about how to store data in clouds. And I think that these are very important questions that nobody yet knows the answer to. And that is something that my colleagues have been very concerned about regarding data. So thank you very much for your advocacy and for mentioning that.
And we should note on that point that Mamaroneck, with the support of our Board of Education, several of whom are in the room, we had, prior to this decision, this potential reversal up in Albany, this district had already opted to forego our Race to the Top money, specifically so that we would not be subject to those data collection and reporting regulations. So that's one example, and there are actually many others, of how we have tried to operate within the regulations, but to keep our core values on the front burner. There are several specific examples within the teacher evaluation landscape that we could talk about, but so thank you again for mentioning that.
We're going to open the floor up to questions now, and what I'm going to do, just in order for the people who watch this again, is ask you to paraphrase questions before you both answer them. Would you be more comfortable sitting down, or are you happy to stand? Yeah, I know. That's what I'm afraid of.
I stepped in gum in the parking lot.
Sit down.
Okay. So I'm going to just leave this microphone for you and
Thanks.
ask for questions.
Yep.
So I guess one of the things I found most troubling was the loss of the joy in your job. And so do you feel as you get somewhat more familiar with what the testing is going to ask, you anticipate some of that coming back, or is it?
Sure. So the question has to do with the loss of professional joy that is associated with at least the initial rollout of the Common Core, and whether we're optimistic about that joy returning.
Well, I have to respond to that personally because I do feel that most of us have tried to retain those moments in the classroom even this year, and I was quite excited about being able to teach a unit that we as a district wrote last year aligned to the Common Core standards. We took a social studies unit on economy and aligned it to the argument writing piece, which is the standard for writing in Common Core. And the fifth grade curriculum requires students to look at countries that are in the Western Hemisphere, and they begin by looking at the physical characteristics, geography, etc. And then they talk about natural resources and which countries export and import. And then fifth graders get to take a more intimate look at the poverty levels of different countries in the Western Hemisphere. And they begin to discover that it's really not a very even playing field in terms of economic competition. And fifth graders are very concerned about the world. They take their role very seriously as sociologists and studies of nature. And from understanding the social studies lessons, they then were introduced to the concept of fair trade. Fair trade is a movement, it's a philosophy, it's a concept that's existed since the 1800s. And they researched fair trade products and had to then write an argument where they understood the pros and cons of fair trade. So they understood the issue, and they had to take a position for or against whether fair trade is an efficient system to level the playing field. They had to conduct research, they had to write argument essays supporting their claim, and I was very fortunate to be able to have a writing celebration in the Murray Library with Pam Tannenbaum, who co-taught that unit with me, and have their parents come in and see, despite all the fuss that's been going on, they've been doing this really wonderful, authentic learning and writing, and I think this has been the highlight of the year so far. I am not alone in having those moments in the district, but we would like to have them more frequently.
Thank you.
Can I follow up to this just a little bit? I've been a substitute teacher off and on in the district, and I can walk into an elementary school classroom and know exactly what test is coming up without anybody telling me, because all that's happening is prep for whichever subject it might be. And I wonder how that impacts your ability to teach an integrated curriculum, and what do our kids lose when you kind of are super focusing on one aspect of the curriculum without having the ability to integrate the curriculum?
Thanks. So the question is about sort of the silos, the academic silos that can develop if we're just aiming toward tests in individual disciplines versus the richness of an integrated curriculum. Is that right, Carolyn? Okay. And I think that, the example that Colleen just gave is a great example where we did take Common Core aligned expectations in reading and writing and listening and speaking, but merge them with social studies content actually in new social studies frameworks that are under consideration in New York State. We have new, I didn't even talk about this, but we also have new science and social studies standards. But it's a great example. I think that when, the key element though, Carolyn, is time. We were very proactive. We had the structure in place of this literacy design team. We have, I think Sabrina alluded to this in the introduction, we have a literacy coach at the elementary level and a math coach who are on-site staff developers. These are positions we created years ago, long before Common Core, but just recognizing the power of ongoing professional development in the school, not sending people out for, outside workshops. So because we had these structures and kind of the team in place, we were really poised to say, hey, let's look at these new science and social studies standards, let's look at the Common Core, and let's do that inventive, imaginative work ourselves of designing units of study. So because we gave ourselves, in a way, the luxury of time with that, and we knew that we were going to do a limited piloting of those units rather than trying to roll something out district-wide all at once, because that enabled us, with these pioneering teachers to really field test, see what was the kids' response. In this case, we were so excited because the kids were really fired up. I mean, one indicator of anything successful is that long after the assessment, whatever it may be, they'd written their argumentative essays, and they wrote beautiful, very persuasive ones, but that the buzz continued. The kids are continuing to talk about this, debate the issues, and so that to us is the sign that this is work worth doing. We developed simultaneous with that an integrated weather unit in third grade, integrating science content, and then also a rocks and minerals, really fascinating geology unit, not just about classifying rocks and minerals, but really about weather-driven and atmospheric changes to the face of the earth, which if ever there was a time to engage kids in, particularly in any region, but here where we've had so many dramatic weather events in recent years. So, the passion, the curiosity, we actually refer to it in our units as lighting the fire. We recognize that as being an essential first phase. So I would say, Carolyn, that to go back to what I said at the outset, the aggressive timeline in New York State has been something that we've had to work against. And a good example of that would be in math, where we were as proactive as any district in the state could be. We have a math coach, as I said. We had a model of releasing teachers for limited amounts of professional time to work with the coach on a rolling basis to develop our own units of study. But the looming, approach of those tests forced us into much more, I think, into a quicker pace than we would have designed. And so I think to link it back to that joy question, now that we have a year of the new curriculum under our belts, it's just starting to happen naturally. Teachers are starting to say, oh, that concept from math really ties in beautifully over here with this unit of study. You can't see that when you are in that separate silo mentality, but now that they've taught through the curriculum, I think it's our plan and our goal to bring that back.
You mentioned the actual core curriculum. How is that different than the curriculum you're currently doing with the syllabus?
Right. Do you want me to answer that? So the question is essentially how different is the new curriculum from the curriculum that we were teaching previously? Colleen alluded to this. I would say that in English language arts, it's really not different at all. We're very proud that we had designed units of study in reading and writing that were very rich. We didn't really talk about some of the main headlines with the Common Core, but one headline in English language arts is the emphasis on nonfiction. Alongside literature. Literature is not, great books are not, dead and gone, but there is an emphasis, first of all, on just kids reading more overall, reading more, writing more. and certainly an emphasis on nonfiction reading and writing, particularly argumentative or persuasive writing. So we're proud that in our homegrown units that we've developed over time, Colleen being a key member, that was already woven throughout. So the changes in English language arts have been modest, which is a good thing because the changes on the math side have been much more dramatic. We had, as a district, prior to my arrival, the district had adopted one of several math curricula endorsed by National Science Foundation and National Council of Teachers of Math, which was Turk Investigations. And there is a lot of controversy. Turk is known to be what we would call a constructivist program. It's one that emphasizes kids actively constructing knowledge through a lot of hands-on problem-solving experiences. The knock against Turk was always, and you can tell me, we could probably chant it, math, facts. Did kids know yes, thank you. Did kids know did they have what we would call procedural fluency? You would just remember that as memorizing your times tables, learning algorithms, learning how to do them quickly and efficiently. I think that was a bit of an unfair criticism of the curriculum itself, but I think it's fair to say in the way that it was often implemented, including probably here in Mamaroneck, it would be fair to say that the problem solving was on the front burner and that some of that automaticity was not emphasized enough. So that's where we were prior to the Common Core. In a very good way, the Common Core in math emphasize real-world application. They claim fewer topics, so more depth over breadth. But in looking at the modules, we might challenge whether we think that's the case. In other words, when you look at sort of the underpinnings, if you look at the anchor standards themselves in math, you'd find yourself saying, absolutely, that, and very consistent with our prior approach. What's been really challenging, though, is that many of the concepts, to put it bluntly, many of the concepts have simply shifted an entire grade level back. So what Colleen used to teach as a 5th grade teacher now, and you can literally see this on a curriculum map, many of those topics are taught in 4th grade. And that's just an example. But we, under the leadership of our math coach, Mariana Ivanoff, we were very proactive. As soon as the standards came out, we began assembling teams of teachers and developing our own in-house curriculum to address this. We were doing something that we thought was sensible, which was phasing this in at kindergarten with our youngest learners. They're just coming to us. Let's put them on this path now toward the more rigorous standards. But again, that alignment of the testing meant that you have kids, today's 5th grader, Jerry back there, where is he? Fourth grader. Jerry's the same 4th grader today that he was, yesterday, but now all of a sudden we're expecting this much more. So we, have made a decision that to actually adopt or adapt curriculum materials published by New York State after teams of our teachers reviewed them, simply because the Turk Investigations curriculum, we had already remapped it, but it was really not aligned enough that we could hold on to that as our core program. So we're in a bit of a transition now in math, there is no doubt, where we're using these new materials. We know we have to do the work now of bringing teachers together to thin out what's there, to really restore. I think that, and parents in the room can say whether you agree, there's definitely an emphasis in the new math on procedures, on kids learning to execute procedures reliably and efficiently, which is important. But I think what we're seeing in practice, what I'm seeing, is that richness of having kids around a table, grappling with a problem, developing strategies, sharing their strategies with each other, testing their theories, does that solution work in other, examples or just in this example? Some of that is currently getting a bit of short shrift and that we need to return to that.
There's a lot of pressure on them. It doesn't matter how often the parents say, children, the tests don't matter. Just do your best, forget the rest. You've been well prepared for this. The message they're getting from school is that the tests are the end-all, be-all. From the moment school starts in September, they are prepping for these tests. That is what they do. And you're talking about the joy. There's no more joy for teachers in teaching. Guess what? There's no joy for the children either. My 7-year-old, my 1st grader, has choice time once a week. Once
time a week, on Fridays, does she get to play with blocks or dolls or have free playtime? They're at school for 6.5 hours a day. It's just unacceptable.
Do you have a question for us? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. But otherwise, you actually know how to do their math and they're good readers. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much. I feel that Mamaroneck is well served by what you all have done from a curriculum standpoint. On the question of testing and also the entire standard, you're reading the papers about people opting out of taking tests. That sounds like the inmates running the asylum. I frankly, in 1939, I remember going to first grade, and they handed out Stanford Achievement Tests. And there wasn't any, gee, would you like to take it or would you like to opt out? And there wasn't any of this stuff about parents going to the barricades about and arguing the thing in the press. And I realized 1939 is different from wherever we are now. But nevertheless, I don't understand the notion of how do people get the right to decide whether or not they're going to do it if the basic problem is one of setting standards, because there is no standard when people can opt out.
Right. There's actually, so the question is about opting out, this statewide or even nationwide opt-out movement. The reality is actually there is no opt-out option. There is not, and that actually districts who don't record a certain level of participation in the exams are subject to fines among other things. So there's a bit of a misunderstanding that it's an option at the parent level to just, opt out. That said, certainly if children are absent from school on the day of the tests, and then are potentially even absent or come in late on the days that makeups are administered, there is no plan or mechanism in place for districts to require those kids to take the test. So I think here in Mamaroneck, the course that we were trying to steer was to say we believe that our curriculum prepares kids well 180 days a year. We believe that although we do oppose the length of the tests, and we certainly oppose what you've just heard described as the excessive anxiety on the part of kids and teachers, we really accept the reality that standardized tests are in some ways a valuable means of analyzing. For me to look district-wide at our, our curriculum in English language arts and math and our ability to compare ourselves to other demographically similar districts, there's actually some value to that. And when we do that work, we're quite encouraged by the results. That said, Colleen alluded to this before. One of the real challenges with the Common Core Aligned tests was the new security measures that were imposed. It used to be the case, and I can give you a very good example of this, it used to be the case that we could sit down either with individual parents or with a grade level team and analyze our performance. Dr. Schaps has brought us many sophisticated data analysis tools and strategies. And so working with our director of technology and information, Mike Colmer, we would be able to sit down and analyze our performance. So for example, there was one item a couple of years ago on the third grade math test where our performance, we did very well on the math test overall, but there was this one pesky item, I remember number 17, where our performance really fell notably below, not just the region. In other words, other high-performing Westchester districts, and we thought, well, what the heck is number 17? And when we just looked at the descriptor, it talked about estimation. We thought, well, that's crazy. We teach estimation. We're all about estimation in third grade. Our ability to look at the actual test item, which we used to be able to do, showed us in that case that it was really about rounding. It was about a kid's ability to round numbers up or down in order to make an estimate. If we had just been, we would have been chasing our tail if we had, assumed that it was an estimation problem. So what Colleen is saying really needs to be emphasized that, and this is all, I assume, a money thing. You see, George, the longer I sit here, the more candid I'll get. I assume it's a money thing that developing test items costs money. And so I'm assuming that the new security measures are that we've had to roll out all new tests now at grades 3 through 8, and now here come the regions, without years of opportunity to field test items and ensure their validity. So these tests are being really kept under lock and key. We had an opportunity, Colleen was part of this, our APPR committee and the Board of Education had an opportunity about a month ago to meet directly with Chancellor Merrill Tisch, with the Chancellor of the Board of Regents. And this was one of the issues that we raised. And she certainly understood the issue and pledged, I guess, an intention to release more items, which really will be not just to demystify the test so that teachers can say, okay, now I see how kids are going to be assessed on that. That's okay. My kids are ready to do that. But also this kind of item analysis, which used to be very much part of our practice and has been really taken away with the security.
In fact, you could go onto the New York State website years ago and look at the previous year's exam. It was always published, and that was always very helpful because it gave teachers and actually gave parents an idea of what kind of work their children were being assessed upon. Right now, that is not possible, and it has been very challenging and very frustrating.
Can I just add the factual element to that as well on the test score? This is an issue we raised. Not 1939, Bob, in 1969, I took Regents exams as a senior in high school. And I asked them, why does it cost so much money? Because the State Education Department determined that they were going to contract out the creation of questions for these tests to Pearson Learning, or to whomever the vendor would be. And Pearson charges them for the number of questions that they create. And because there are so much testing between 3rd through 8th grade, that they didn't have enough money to get enough questions. I said, this is insanity. This is, you've developed the questions necessary because anybody else who ever took a Regents, what did we do? We did prior Regencies as tests before we took the Regents that we were supposed to take. And that's exactly what you're saying you can't do right now for kids who are going to go through.
And to piggyback on that, there was anecdotal information last year that the same questions were used on the grade 6, 5, and 7 exam and the multiple choice section of the ELA.
Oh, so they didn't buy new questions.
And so the question arose, which grade were those questions most developmentally appropriate for?
Hi. My wife is a Spanish teacher at the Hummets, and she's the chair of the foreign language department. And she did not dispatch me. I give her my own volition. But since her work is very much the subject of our dinner and pillow talk, the best interest.
Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing that.
I'm wondering where foreign language and language teaching falls in the context of the Common Core and the overall curriculum, and whether the emphasis or the status of foreign language training has changed.
Yeah. No, I would be proud to say not. The question is about the status of foreign language instruction in the midst of all this. We have a very vibrant foreign language program here in Mamaroneck, where you heard Sabrina mention a very exciting new development this year is the creation of a dual language program. It's a district-wide program housed at Mamaroneck Avenue, with our very first cohort of kindergartners who are now just blossoming with their reading and writing and listening and speaking ability in both Spanish and English, and there's a commitment to grow that program from kindergarten through 5th grade. At Homics, kids have an opportunity eventually to continue with Spanish if they so desire, and or to take French and Mandarin, Chinese. And all of those languages then continue on to the high school. In fact, even as we speak, I think 20 high school Mandarin students are on a bus to JFK en route to Shanghai and Beijing and Xi'an, where I had the opportunity to go last year. So there's a fabulous exchange program. We have a proposal now for a French exchange as well. So the languages, I think it's a really good example of something that we highly value in this district, that we are taking pains to preserve or in fact extend, even though it's not something that, you know, our 3 through 8 testing program assesses. I would add to that the UA program, the Unified Arts program at Homix, where the kids have just an amazingly vibrant program. My own daughter came through and benefited immensely from that. Again, those are things that are never going to be assessed on a state test, and yet all of us, I actually saw, I think it was 7th graders learning how to do laundry recently. They were sorting their colors, and I thought, oh my goodness, yeah. So, you know, it's just vital that those are the programs that hook kids' interest. You talk about proficiency in a second language and how vital that is, you know, in today's world. So, you know, certainly we're committed, and I think the dual language program is a good example of our commitment to even extend that.
Does the core curriculum affect the high school? I haven't heard anything about, you know, something higher than 8th grade.
Yes.
How does that work?
Yeah. Yeah, the question is whether the Common Core affects the high school as well. And the answer is yes, but on a slightly delayed rollout. So that's why you haven't heard us talking about it as much. The Common Core standards are K-12 standards. And so we've had our, certainly our English language arts and mathematics chairs at Homix, at the high school, our special educators, looking closely at those standards and doing the work of aligning the high school syllabi. This year is the first administration of the new Common Core aligned algebra regents. So kids at Homix and at the high school are going to be taking that new algebra regents, but unlike 3 through 8, those tests are being phased in a year at a time. So there has been more time for curriculum development, and that's why you're not hearing as much fuss from us. Yeah.
Yeah, my husband and I are both retired teachers. All our children, both our children went through these schools. My question relates to 2 different questions. It relate partly one to what you said and one to what George was saying. The first one is about the problem for teachers of it being such a lonely profession in most places. The opportunities for collaboration, and which you alluded to, but I'd like to know what you have to say about that. The other is about with Annette LaRoe's book, Unequal Childhoods, about the problem, that was powerful for me, of finding a common language between educators and child-rearing families that would begin to cover the gaps that George spoke of. And I'd like to just hear what you have to say.
Okay, so 2 questions, and I'm sorry. So the second question was about, can you say the name of the book again?
Annette LaRoe, who sent her graduate students into homes and looked at child rearing in poor families and different styles and found, you know, and there's just no common language.
Right. So Annette LaRoe's book on unequal childhoods and the challenge of bridging the school-to-home gap, particularly in terms of language around effective child-rearing techniques that prepare kids for school. Okay. And then the first part of your question was about collaboration opportunities for educators. Do you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, that is something that has been a rich tradition in this district, and with respect to the units of study that we've done, that was a team of people who collaborated, and after those units were written and designed and implemented, we had time to go review all the work that we had done in teams, but also get feedback from all of our colleagues. We were doing the same thing with our math. The math mapping team was very diverse across all 4 elementary schools. It was very powerful to sit in a conference room and be able to compare how we taught certain standards of math and have those light bulb moments that there might be another way to approach this. Honestly, that has been very diminished this year with respect to the math because, you know, part of the new curriculum that we have adopted from Engage New York, you know, New York State got into the business of publishing curriculum, which Meryl Tisch quite honestly told us they regret. They don't think it was such a great idea. The modules themselves are very lengthy. They contain very sophisticated language. One lesson could take up about 13 pages for the teacher and 7 to 8 pages for the student of rote computation or problem solving, which is the antithesis of the type of math that we were teaching. So we were given those materials the first week of school this year, and so we greeted our children the first day of school, and on the second day of school we handed them out their material and said, "Here, kids, open the binders, and here's your other material." So it was a very, very fast pace, and part of the reason that we had to work that quickly again was because of the standards imposed by New York State. They developed a pacing map, and there is a new lesson every single day. And one of the things we've gotten smart about, though, is that we meet in the hallway. That the teachers, each grade has a common prep and a common lunchtime. So we all kind of converge in a corner and start talking about, well, I taught this lesson today, and this is what I did, and how did you do that? And so those conversations are starting to take place again, but I know that Annie is very aware, our math coach is very aware that we need to get back to that technique and that style. Finding the time to do that has been very difficult, but I know that that is really a priority. That's one of the values that we're trying to adhere to. So I understand your concern as a former educator, like where is that piece? We're trying to get that piece back.
Yeah, we do have, just to build on that, Colleen just mentioned this, our new elementary schedule, although there have been some downsides to it, a positive aspect of the schedule, and part of the reason that we implemented it was in order to provide common planning time for each grade level team at the elementary level. So that's built in every single day into the schedule. We, of course, have faculty meetings, and then once a month we have grade level team meetings, which are a portion of the day where the entire grade level meets for more of an extended block. So we're trying within the teacher contract. It's always a balancing act of recognizing the value of professional collaboration, but trying to minimize the loss of instructional time. That's just always. So finding those models. And then with respect to your other question, just about homeschool communication, I would say that one positive, the parents have been coming out in droves with questions, with very heartfelt perspectives, which are very important for us to hear. So I would say we've been really this year, we always have in the past had curriculum nights, had family math nights, had reading and writing celebrations, but I would say that the number of those sort of outreach opportunities has dramatically increased this year, and we've had notable attendance, actually at all 4 elementary schools, which is really heartening. We have increased needs for translation, which is such a wonderful thing, because our Latino parents have been really coming out in droves as well. So I think that maybe in a healthy way, the debate, here we all are gathered here to have this discussion. So that's been a silver lining, I think, of the change. People hear about it, or maybe they see what their child is bringing home. It raises questions. And how do we, bridge those communication gaps? Yeah. Oh yeah. Ooh, you've got to go teach. Do you need to go? Yeah. Colleen's kids are probably. Yeah. Sure, that's great.
Okay. Given the nature of the strong feeling, primarily in opposition, what's your take on how long the Common Core is going to last?
How long is the Common Core going to last? That's a great, it's a great question. Yeah, we could ask George. But I guess that's why I would go back to what I said at the very beginning, that what we have really tried to do, and I guess in the case of elementary math, I would acknowledge that I don't think we've achieved this yet this year. But what we always try to do is to say, if all of this evaporated, you wake up tomorrow and it's not Groundhog Day, somehow this whole thing has just poof disappeared. What investment would we continue to have in the curriculum that we have designed? In other words, to what extent does our curriculum really approach concepts and skills in the way that we think is professionally valuable? And I would absolutely say that in English language arts, we're very committed to what we're doing. We feel very solid. I think we were going to mention the Tri-States review. Yeah, do you want to say something?
Sure. A happy coincidence last year was, despite all of the new deadlines that were looming for us,
Mamaroneck participates in something called the Tri-States Consortium. We consult with districts in Connecticut, New Jersey, and parts of New York, and have friendly visits where administrators and teachers from districts go visit other districts to explore a specific question. And it was our turn to be visited, and the question that we posed was, how well does our English language arts curriculum seem to meet the Common Core standards? So the week before the ELA was given last year, we were visited for a week by different administrators and teachers, and their report in June really validated the work of the literacy design team, because one of the things that they noted was that there was such a strong, consistent reading and writing curriculum across all 4 of the elementary schools. And in fact, they noted that no matter which school they had walked into, it was very clear what units of study were being taught, the actual student work, the authentic work that students were doing, and they found it striking that there was such consistency and I dare say joy when they were visiting those classrooms. So that was a great aha moment for us, like, wow, someone else coming in is seeing the same kind of things that we're hoping that we're going to achieve. With respect to how long the Common Core will last, I would love George to answer that question. But one thing I will say is that we as educators understand that this profession is undergoing a huge transformation. There's outside forces being imposed on us that have nothing to do with New York State. There's online learning communities. There are, education is now a market to be invested in, so there's a lot of big money that's involved right now. And I don't think any one of us can really predict what the profession is going to look like 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And we're very conscious of that as we make these decisions. So to reiterate a point that Annie made, we want to always stick to what are we here for? We're here for the students. We want them to learn. What do we want them to learn, and how are we going to get them there?
Thank you, Rachel. You want to say something else?
No, George is going to say something.
George, do you want to say something? Before we let everybody go, George, do you want the mic?
In nature of the question is how long will Common Core last? I mentioned earlier that in my objections from a progressive standpoint, there is a conservative objection to Common Core in which they don't want to see standardized education around the country. They're fearful that it becomes big government intrusion, blah, blah, blah. About a month ago or 3 weeks ago, Indiana pulled out of Common Core, and it came from the governor and the legislature, which are fairly conservative. And I think we're all watching to determine if that's the beginning of a movement from conservative or red states out of Common Core. If that happens over the next few years, then you're not talking about national standards. It'll ratchet back to each state determining whether this is what they want or not, or will it be a consortium of 12 states, not 45 states. And at that point, then you're going to have to ask the political question. Who's the governor at the time? What's the construct of the Board of Regents at the time? Who's in the White House at the time? Because George Bush had No Child Left Behind, followed by Barack Obama, Race to the Top. Those are the political dynamics which may determine whether this is going to run for a length of time, or they're going to get new instructions in a couple of years and, stop, reverse, go the other direction. And that could happen. There's no way to know that.
Just by a quick show of hands, who wants to be a 5th grader in Ms. Melnyk's class next year?
I know.
Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
And thank you both. It was really
Thank you so much.